we do steps for our client so that we don't lose them earlier, is it allows you to ride up into the much richer part of that customer relationship. This step costs them, over time, millions of dollars for not having a solution for it.
Maui Mastermind presents the Business Coach Podcast, answering your questions and providing real actionable insights for building a better, stronger, more profitable business without sacrificing your time, life, or freedom anymore.
Hi, and welcome to The Business Coach. I'm your host, David Finkel, and this week I want to talk about a radically new way to literally visualize retention in your business so that you can engineer a compounding of growth, of revenue, of profitability in your business. And so the place we're going to start is I want you to think about how hard it is that you actually work to generate a new client, a new customer. I mean, you think about it. One of the clients we coach, they spend probably close to $15,000 to generate a new client. Now that client might go on to spend $80,000 to $150,000 on average with them, right? Other businesses, you might spend $400, $700 to generate a $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 customer. But it's not just the money that you spend to generate that customer. Think about how much blood, sweat, tears, and toil goes into prospecting and selling and closing and onboarding that new customer or client with that part. If you are fortunate enough to have a business model that has some element of recurring relationship, an ongoing relationship with your customer or client, retention is a huge growth compounder for you. And so I want to give you a different way to think about it. A lot of times when I talk with clients early on, and they're a coaching client of ours, they'll say things like, yes, we really work hard to delight our clients, or we work hard to satisfy our clients. We work hard to get that 5-star review on Google, whatever it might be. But when we dig deeper and I ask them questions about how is it that you actually methodically, mechanically, algorithmically increase retention, what are the practical steps that you take? And what I hear commonly over and over again is they do it by intuition. They do it by haphazard. They do it by chance. Hey, if we just do a good enough job producing our product or service, the customer will stay with us. And it doesn't work that way. Instead, I want you to think about how can we engineer retention in and do it through a process of visualization. Not literally like, oh, lay back, take a deep breath visualization, but literally charting out what is the process wherein a client starts with you and stays with you over time. What are the steps and stages, and how can we actually put numbers, rigor to this so that we know how many people come into step one, how many people leave step one, how many people come into step two, how many people leave step two. And as a result from that, what it's going to give you, it's going to let you know that from step one to step two of that client journey, that you retain 80% of your customers. And from step 2 to step 3, you retain 86%. And from step 3 to step 4, you retain 14%. From step 4 to 5, wait a second, you already saw the sharp drop off. And when you do it this way, it becomes obvious and easy where we need to put our best attention. And then from there, we'll talk about ways that once we pinpointed the major drop points where we lose our customers or clients, then we can say, how can we have creative ideas, practical ideas to plug the drain, to make sure they stay, or as many more can stay with us. And let's share an example for what that looks like. So this is a tool that we use with coaching clients. And what we're doing is here, we're laying out the current life journey of a customer with us. And so we look at it this way. We start off and say, okay, and this is an example for an IT services business. And it starts off where we're just going to draw a flow chart. You know, this is, if any of you have been involved doing any kind of funnel work, creating a marketing funnel, this type of box with an arrow is very common for you to have seen before. And the way that I want you to visualize this part is every box represents a step in that process. And our example here, I used an example from an actual coaching client of ours. So the coaching client I'm using here is an IT services business. They had a software product that they worked with and supported over time for a niche industry in the construction world. Very successful company. They sold for well over $10 million when they sold. But my point being with this part is I'm just going to give it to you. Now, the numbers are not from that business, right? I made them even more extreme so that we can make certain things obvious in the example here. But the concepts ring true and what we do with them. And I'll share examples for other businesses, whether they be in professional service firms, whether they be in blue collar businesses, whether they be in just generic service businesses. So this would be what I would call a service, an IT services company. Let's jump in and go back and look at this together. So they had what's called the discovery phase. This is where someone would initially pay them to come do a deep dive about the technology needs for their company in this industry. Then the next step was the design phase, where they would design through a solution for them. And then this next stage after that was what was called the implementation stage. The next box was the implementation box. So here we have 3 boxes. Box 1, discovery phase. Box 2, design phase. Box 3, implementation phase. Once that was done, then after that, the 4th box was their first year maintenance fee, a fee for them to maintain the work that they're doing with that customer. Then there was a year 2 maintenance fee, and then afterwards it went to a long-term maintenance where they would try to do it year after year after year. And I just didn't want to draw, a never-ending series of boxes with that. So every time in this flow chart you see a box, that's a discrete stage of a customer with you and your company. And every time you see an arrow, that's a conversion point. So the discovery phase says 100 people came into this discovery phase and paid for them to do a deep dive discovery look at the technology needs for this company. And from those, 95% of them, or 95 of them, went into the design phase, the next step. Then from the design phase to implementation, you look at that arrow and it was 89%. From implementation into year 1 maintenance, it was only 18%. From year 1 maintenance to year 2 maintenance, that arrow was 93%. And from year 2 into long-term maintenance, it was 93%. So I made these numbers really extreme so we can see that the place of greatest opportunity for us here right now is clearly for us to be focusing in on this area right here about the implementation phase to year 1 maintenance. Like right now, we're only getting 18% of those people to come over. Now you say, well, David, why does this matter? Well, this matters because in our example here, while we get paid $25,000 for implementation, we get paid $8,000 per year for maintenance, and the average client that goes to long-term maintenance is $36,000. So let's think about that for a moment. Here we have, and we can even put some numbers to this here in just a moment, but we have started off with 100 customers. We lost 7 of them when they went from discovery to design. We lost another 89% of them, we lost another 11%. We went from design to implementation. And then unfortunately, we lost 82%. Is that right? No, 88%. I could do my math. No, 82% doing my math. 18% retained, so 82% were lost. We went from implementation to year 1 maintenance. Now, why does this matter? I want you to think about it this way in your business. In your business, if you were to chart this out, you might say, David, our first step is let's think about it this way. Our first step with a customer, let's say you have a pest control company, for example, is we do our first service, and let's say you charge $400 for that first service. And you might do that for over the course of a year for 2,000 homes. Okay? Now, if we do some math with that part, it's not bad revenue, it's not horrible revenue, but that's 8,000,000. So that's $800,000 of revenue from this business from new homes with that part. Now, someone had to sell the job, you had to pay for leads for the jobs, but from that you generate $800,000 of what we'll call new business. Now that's cool, new business, that's good stuff. Let's keep building on this here if we can. Let's keep building on this. So now we look at what about that second service? You're trying to get them on that second service. Now I don't know pest control too well. We've got a number of clients that do it, but I'm thinking that they probably do that. I don't know if it's monthly. I don't actually know if it's quarterly. We're going to pretend it's quarterly. I haven't actually talked with them about how frequently they do this. So let's do quarterly. And so getting into an annual contract, we'll call this an annual contract. If I can turn this one-off to an annual contract, And that annual contract, let's use a number here, that might be $150 per month, or if we look at over the year, $1,800 per year for them to come by and take care of the pest needs in the basic way. Now you look at that. Now, if we don't put energy and effort to it, and we take what happens, we might discover that for every 2,000 that come in the front end, we might discover in our old way of doing it that only 500 went on to do this annual plan. And you think about that real quick here for a moment. You've dropped 75% of your customers were gone, which means that you only retained 2,000 went in, 500 came out. You only retained 25% on the retention. That's your arrow between the two boxes. What if we could take that arrow and we can turn it from 25% to 50%? Think about that for a moment. So I don't have my calculator here, so I'm not going to do the math on the fly. But if I took that, what that means is now I'm going to have not 500 people come to that annual contract, but I'm going to have 1,000 people, right, come to that contract. 1,000 times 1,800, that's a pretty healthy amount of revenue. You can do the math on that one, right? We get that part of it. If I do my math correct just on the fly here, that's $1.8 million. That's a pretty darn good number. So as we think about that, what did that mean? That was worth $800,000. Wait a second. By focusing on this retention point, David, you're saying I made as much on that next year contract part as I did with all the effort to sell those new people. Yes, the power of retention with that part. And of course, you're going to continue on this retention from that first year contract to the second annual contract to the third annual contract, et cetera, et cetera. So when you think of retention this way, when you think of retention as a funnel, again, when you think of retention as a funnel, what it pushes you to do is it pushes you to be thinking about where specifically is the biggest drain where I lose my customers, I lose my clients. Going back into our example here, this person lost their customers from the implementation phase into that year one maintenance phase with that part. And as you think about it, what's so important with this is once I can identify that, now I can do something about it. I'm going to give another example from an actual coaching client. This is a company that had a web hosting company. One of the clients we work with, we helped them take their company all the way to the point where they sold it for 8 figures. They had a wonderful exit from that part. And so I'm going to give you the example for this particular web hosting company. Now, the client came to us probably originally close to 10 years ago. They were a client for about 8 years before they sold. And so here's what happened with them. When we had them do their customer journey with their boxes and arrows, they looked at things like, somebody would sign up. The first step was someone would sign up for hosting with them. Now their hosting would be anywhere from $50 a month all the way up to maybe as much as $200 or $300 per month per account that they would do. And most of their customers would do multiple accounts. You think about it for your business, how many websites do you actually have for hosting accounts? For us in Maui, I think we've got, I know it's more than 4, but less than 10. I don't know how many it is. We have our development server for this, and we have our main company website server for that. We have the staging platform for our app. We have the list goes on. We might even have more than 10 right now, for all I know. I'm not the technical guy in the company. But they had the signups here, and they might sign up over the course of a year. Let's say they signed up 10,000 new hosting companies with that. Here's what they found, though. Now, once they signed up, their model was monthly recurring revenue. It was a big deal. Monthly recurring revenue. Their biggest cost by far was their sales marketing cost. Their second biggest cost was the underlying infrastructure. Their underlying infrastructure, though, didn't get paid all incrementally. It got paid in chunks. They would buy a whole bunch of new server towers in a data center, some racks, and would have a certain amount of capacity. Now, if they used that capacity halfway, they still paid all the expense on it. Then once they filled that or got close to it, they would need the next server rack they would add to that. And so they did have a capital expenditure from that, but it came in these lumps. And so The incremental profit when they only were 50, 60% full or using that capacity was huge, because when they took it from that to full, so to speak, what that meant was they had already paid all the hard infrastructure costs for that. They had just incremental energy cost, etc. Big deal. So sales and marketing costs, big cost. The infrastructure cost, big cost. But the incremental profit, as they kept a customer over time, went way up. Their margins were fantastic. And it was shown when the person came, or the company came to buy them. They loved that type of revenue model. They were actually doing what's called a roll-up. They were buying a whole bunch of these hosting companies, buying them for a very healthy multiple, but because they had the scale of lots of these, they were able to then create so that they could turn around and sell it at some point for a much larger multiple based on a much larger amount of EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. Okay, so 10,000 come in the front end. What they discovered was they were literally losing 50%, which means their retention was only 50% of their customers went from signing up for their server to actually setting up the website. Now, there's a fancy term when they talk about setting up a website in their world. It was called the migration, where someone would take the website from their old server company, their old hosting company, and migrate it to theirs. So their fancy term for it was someone would actually complete the migration only 50% of the time. And usually this would happen, if it was going to happen, within the first 90 days. Now think about that for a moment. If you're paying for, let's say, 5 sites, 5 hosting accounts, and you're paying $50 per, that's $250 per month. If you don't actually migrate, put your stuff over, how long are you going to keep paying $250 a month if your stuff is still on the old servers? Not very long, are you? Maybe for 3 months, 4 months, and that's what they saw. They saw this rise in revenue for that 90-day period, and all of a sudden they would lose customers. They would lose customers. They would work, and they would lose customers. They would work, and they would lose customers. It was a really painful thing. They put a couple of tactics in place, and we'll talk about the tactics in a moment. And they took this number from 50% retention, and they did something really extraordinary. They brought that number all the way up to over 85+% retention. And they did that by getting their customer to actually do that migration so that they're on their hosting company. Now, what did that mean for them? It meant hundreds of thousands of dollars of retention revenue per month over time, which meant millions of dollars of enterprise value when the guy, our client, our coaching client, went to sell his company. It's a really big deal. So what can we do to plug the gap in these retention drains? The first step is we need to figure out, where are the drains? That's the most important part. We need to find, where does this thing drop off? And I gave you some examples in the IT services business. I gave you an example in the pest control business. I gave you an example in the web hosting business. Let's think about now, once we've identified by just having our boxes and our arrows, once we see that and we look at each arrow represents how many people went in, how many people came out, and the conversion, the percentage that went from the beginning step to the next step, that conversion rate as a percent is the retention rate for that step. And it's really easy to do. If 10,000 came in, and in the old case 5,000 stayed, 5,000 divided by 10,000, what's left divided by what started gives me my retention. So if I had 10,000 go in and 8,500 stayed, 8,500 divided by the 10,000 gives me my retention rate. Again, the formula for the retention rate is really simple. I take the number who stayed and divide that number by the number who went into that step. And that's my arrow. Every arrow should have a conversion rate. So what I do is I have my boxes, box, box, box of every step of my customer journey. Now, I have to be smart. I have to think about how I can sometimes simplify these boxes. So some of you might overcomplicate it. David, I've got 42 boxes. Too many. So you might have to group or chunk some of the steps together in one box just to make it more manageable and more realistic. Typically in a funnel, you're going to see as few as 2 to as many as 8 to 12. If you have more than 8 or 12, you need to chunk and simplify. Typically, you're going to be somewhere between 5 to 7 is very common for what you'll see. Then we go back to our historical numbers and look, what's our historical baseline? How many numbers started? How many new sales did we make during the past prior year? We made 100 sales during that prior year. Great. How many of those prior sales went to step 2, the second box? 82 of them. Great. We had 100 to start with. We had 82 after that. 82 divided by 100 is 82%. We had 82% retention, which is what that arrow is going to have above the arrow. That's all we had to do with that. We do that for each of the steps. And then when I look at that, which arrow is the most expensive one for you in terms of what it's costing your business in terms of revenue by the drain and loss and attrition of customers? The example for IT services I gave you was the step from implementation to the long-term maintenance. The example here for this web hosting company, by the way, once they got them to do the migration, their retention was over 90% retention long-term annually. Think of how fantastic that is. My God, if I can get them from here, that's a $3,000 a year customer. If I can just get them past that first step, they're going to be worth 90% of $3,000 every year. That's a big deal. David, what do you mean 90% of $3,000? Well, if I'm going to retain 90% of them, and their annual value is 250 times 12, which is 3,000, then their long-term annual value is the 90% of the annual revenue, the retention rate of the annual value. Ooh, that's pretty cool math, David. Thanks for teaching me. No problem. So this step cost them over time millions of dollars for not having a solution for it. The biggest reason they didn't have a solution for it is no one had ever asked them to make their boxes and their arrows. So I pushed them, I coached them to make their boxes and their arrows, and when they discovered that, it became clear. So here's some things that they did, and then I'll go through some generic tactics. When they discovered, they said, well, why are people not doing the migration? Let's talk to some of these customers that dropped from us. Hey, Mr. Jones, I understand that you left us. I understand. I'm not trying to earn your back. Although if someday you decide to come back, we would love it. I just wanted to ask you an honest question, to ask for your help. I noticed that you had signed up for 6 different hosting accounts with us, but you never migrated your old sites over to us. Can I ask what got in the way of that? And they talked to some customers. They did some thinking about it. And what they discovered was nobody likes to do the work of migrating their website from one hosting company to the other. It's a very sticky service, web hosting, which is why their company was so valuable, because that revenue is very sticky revenue. As they built this further, what they discovered was that if they could make it easier to make that migration happen successfully, it was worth hundreds of thousands of dollars of revenue and profit per year, which translated into millions of dollars of enterprise value for them. And it was compounding because the retention rate over here, as they did that, every time they could improve that, they got the compounded value of what they were doing for the growth. It's a big deal. So what they did, the most important 2 things they did, number 1, they created a client support team that was working with the brand new signup. So if you signed up with their hosting company, you got a dedicated specialist who would say, hey, Joe, welcome to our company. I'm your specialist to help you with your site migration from your old hosting company to the new hosting company. This is a value add service that we do. There's no extra cost for you. I'm doing this here because I want to see you be successful migrating over. Are you the technical person doing the migration, or should you connect me with that IT person in your company? So the first thing they did was that. Number 2, who they staffed it with. When you were in the first 90 days, it used to be that you got your tier 1 support overseas, then your tier 2 support only in those really emergency situations. They flipped it on the head. They said, if you're a brand new customer, you get our very best technical people in terms of support for the first 90 days. Why? Because if we can get you to do the migration, we're going to keep 90% of you every single year paying $3,000 per month for your hosting accounts. Per year on your hosting accounts. It's a big deal. So think about that. They flipped it on its head and it became obvious with that. Let's do a couple examples of what you can do. You might find that in your service you need to strengthen your onboard, that you're losing people there. How do we simplify it? How do we clarify it? How do we do steps for our client so that we don't lose them earlier. You might find that you're losing them after 2 years. There's a little bit of a 2-year itch, so to speak. Okay, well, what can you do that's somewhere around the 18-month mark to get them past and well into the 2-year part, to skip right over that 2-year itch? What can you do? Is there some way you can shake things up in a good way? Is there some ways that you can get more deeply embedded with them? Can you make yourself stickier? Can you increase the switching costs from you? Maybe you need to work on the relationship. Like, for example, one of our clients, they sold industrial fluids. And one of their big risk factors for them was when the person they worked with as the purchasing agent for the companies they sold their industrial fluids to, when he or she left to go to some other company, the new purchasing agent came in. The new purchasing agent didn't have the relationships with them. They had the relationships with other potential fluid manufacturers. And so it became a bit of a crapshoot whether they would keep the account. Our comment to them is, let's think about that. How can we bridge that retention point? Number one, how do we get ourselves to have more relationships with more other people? Number two, how do we make sure that what we do is embedded in their very processes for how they go about things, such that they would have a much harder time switching because of the formulations and the startup costs with that and the risks there? How do we put them on a long-term contract would be another example of a retention tool. How can we continually share with our customers stories of how clients or customers have stayed with us over time? Go back to that pest control part. Mrs. Jones, our goal here up front, we're going to do your first year servicing. What you'll find is the very best results we do are when we work with a client like yourself over the long term. Rather than deal with an infestation, we believe in prevention. I just want to ask you a question, Mrs. Jones. Would you rather call us when you have an infestation and only then, or would you rather us behind the scenes, like all of our other clients, just take care of things to maintain it such that we prevent any future infestations? And if they ever were to happen, they're much smaller and faster to be dealt with. What would be more comfortable for you, to avoid having the infestations and use prevention, or to wait for the infestations, right? I'm using stories of other customers with that. If I look around this community here, 4 out of 5 of our customers have us on an annual plan. And why? By maintaining the services, by making sure every 2 to 3 months we're coming out to service with the pest control servicing. What we do is we prevent infestations. Again, I don't know if I'm accurate with the language there in terms of, maybe I need to come out monthly for it. It's been forever since I've ever sprayed for pests, but I think you get the point. Another example might be a gift, a retention gift. If you know that new customers get a little bit nervous, maybe you add a gift to have an emotional bond with them, with that part. Or maybe you know that when you come into a company for your service, that the person who runs operations, he or she gets nervous. Why is this company coming in to consult? Fine. Maybe you make a special gift to that person, or somehow have a better communication to enroll that person and engage that person. So when we think about retention as this visualized funnel, box to box to box, with the conversion point for each step along the line being the retention rate from each box into the next box, it allows us to pinpoint where should we put our best energies and attention. Once we've got that, now we brainstorm what are all the ideas that we have to retain. And from there, we pick the very best 1, 2, or 3 ideas and we implement them. We continue to measure how's retention going. If our retention rate goes up, wonderful, we double down on those winning ideas. If those things don't work, we let them fall by the wayside and we try some different things. Remember, feed your winners, starve your losers. But this is how we can make retention work for us over the long term. Now, what's the implications of all this? Like why, David, should I even put all the energy? Why, David, should I put the effort to doing that? And that's a good question. And so I'll share with you an example from my business. I'll just share with you an example from Maui Mastermind. And as we think about that, we're a business coaching company. Now, I had built a prior coaching company and sold it. And I sold it for a lot of money. I started that company with a partner when I was 27. Is that right? No, 26, excuse me. I started when I was 26. And I sold it when I was 33. 35. So we had built this business, but that business was built off of what we'll call very lumpy revenue. We did coaching on a 1-year contract effectively, and we sold lots, tens of thousands of 1-year coaching contracts over that time. And they were fairly expensive, but they were 1-year coaching contracts. The multiple we got when we sold, very low because it was lumpy revenue. But more importantly, we had to work really hard to keep finding. It was a sales and marketing juggernaut for how we did that. And quite frankly, I did not enjoy that very well. I retired when I was 35. And then about a year later, I'm like, I had started another company. There was no way I'm going to sit on my heels. I just couldn't do it. So I started my next business, which grew into Maui Mastermind as you know it today. It didn't start that way. It took me about a year and a half, 2 years of feeling through what is it I wanted to do, how is it I wanted to do that, but it grew into Maui Mastermind as we know it today. And today we've served thousands of business coaching clients in a variety of industries, 40, 50 different industries and verticals, different business models. But the big thing is where once upon a time, the old model, let's kind of put that down here, the old model was coaching as a one-time deal, a package. And that worked. That did work. As we sold under the old model, it worked, and it generated millions of dollars of revenue and profit, and was worth several millions of dollars when I sold it. However, there was no compounding of that revenue from a perspective of keeping a customer over time. So now, jump forward, and we learned, right? I was young and dumb back then. I didn't mind being on the road 2-3 weeks out of the month, doing the dog and pony show, selling it at conferences or events, 600 or 700 people. I didn't mind it back then. But when I became a parent and I had kids and started getting older, there's no way I was going to do that. It wasn't what I enjoyed most was really getting deep and working with a client business and helping them to double, to 10x that business. And then even take them through the exit of selling that company 7, 10, 12 years later. That is really rewarding. Like, for example, just yesterday, as I'm here in the studio doing this podcast, just yesterday, I was talking to one of our coaching clients. And he's a guy that we've worked with for close to 11 years now. He's got a medical business, a physician, and I can't wait to see it. He's somewhere in the next 12 to 18 months, he's going to sell that medical business for a very large windfall, and that's really enjoyable. I got to hear how he's going to take care of his key team members with that. I got to hear about what's that mean for his family. I got to hear about, and we got to discuss what's going to come next for him, because again, he's like me, he's not going to retire. He's going to get on to something else to keep himself active and engaged in the world. That's the rewarding part. Working with people for just a year, you didn't develop the relationships over time. Like when I look at friends and people I enjoy spending time with, a lot of our long-standing clients have become close friends. We spend time on travel together. We enjoy each other's families when we go places because it's fun. One-off relationships didn't serve me that way. But nowadays, if we look at it, we have a model wherein we call it coaching. But the coaching, we call it, and I'm going to make this little infinity sign, not drawn perfectly there. We talk about coaching as a forever service. How can we deliver value to that client long-term such that they feel the value received year after year, and they stay with us, not for a 1-year relationship, but they stay with us for a 3-year, a 6-year, a 12-year or longer relationship, which is what many of our clients do. And when you change that, here's what it does. This model goes fast very quickly, but it has a cliff that it comes off of if you stop the sales marketing juggernaut. This model has a slower growth rate. But what happens is if you stay with those relationships over time and you get yourself to the richer part of this compound curve, it might be that this earlier curve here, probably to $1 million of profitability. I'm trying to think back here of how long did that take us. It probably took us maybe 4 or 5 years to hit $1 million of profitability. I think it was 4, but it might have been 5 years. In this case, of profitability from the coaching services, it might have taken us 8 or 9 years to hit $1 million of profitability. But once we crossed over that threshold, and now we get to be in the much richer part of that relationship, it's a much different thing. I couldn't leave this business because I was one of the main sales producers for it. I couldn't leave this business. I was tied to it. I didn't enjoy the short duration of the relationships, and it got very tiring. A lot of pressure, stressful in terms of cash flow. This model, because we're delivering on the value over time, this model, because we're producing a relationship over time, it's diversified with many different companies. What it does is it reduces the pressure, and now here we have a very stable cash flow with relationships that we enjoy, where this might sell for a multiple when we sold it of X. This is worth probably 5 times more per dollar of profit, per dollar of EBITDA. Why? Because of the recurring retention revenue versus this one-off revenue. It's a big deal. So this model is more profitable. This model is more durable or stable. This model actually gets the benefit of compounding, which means it's actually more scalable, and it's more valuable in the marketplace should the company ever be sold. So going back to this for you, I want you to think about this. In your business, how can I pinpoint where are we losing our customers? We call this a drop point analysis, and I've coached you how to do that. I've given you not just the what to do, but the specific steps how to do that. From there, you're going to pick the one retention point that currently costs you the most for being as weak as it is. From there, the next step, number 3, says we're going to brainstorm what are our ideas to bridge over that retention point. We're going to pick 1 or 2 of those ideas to implement. We're going to track those numbers over time and see the impact and make adjustments from that. When you can retain your customers, your clients over time, what that allows you to do is it allows you to ride up into the much richer part of that customer relationship. It's more durable. It's more valuable to the marketplace should you ever choose to have an exit. That's what I'm coaching you to do. All right, get to work. Your first step is to create your flow chart of your retention steps of your journey with the life cycle of a customer or client of yours. I wish you every success with this. If you have any questions, please send them to us. Email them to us. We'd be happy to take some questions here on The Business Coach. Just send it to thebusinesscoach@mauimastermind.com. Again, thebusinesscoach@mauimastermind.com. I hope you leave here today with a new way of thinking more actively about retention, visualized like you would as a funnel. Thank you for joining me today.